The plastic seat of the bus stop was biting through the thin fabric of my trousers, the chill of the late autumn wind seeping directly into my bones. I squeezed my fingers tighter around the handle of my single, worn-out canvas duffel bag. It wasn't heavy. That was the pathetic part. 2 years of marriage, 2 years of building what I thought was a life, and everything I owned in the world could be packed into a bag that didn't even weigh 15 pounds. I stared down at my shoes, my vision blurring as the streetlights overhead began to fracture into watery halos. "You're broken, Caleb." Jacob's voice still echoed in my ears, sharp and clinical, stripping away whatever dignity I had left in that pristine, sterile living room. "My parents deserve a grandchild. I deserve a legacy. We knew you were a recessive omega, yes, but the doctors said there was a chance. Clearly, that chance was a lie. I can't keep wasting my prime on a dead end. A dead end. That's what I was. A recessive omega whose scent was nothing more than a faint, barely detectable whisper of watered-down chamomile, and whose body was structurally incapable of carrying an alpha's child." I let out a shaky, ragged breath, watching it mist in the cold air. I had no one to blame but my own foolish, desperate heart. When Jacob first walked into the 24-hour convenience store where I used to work the graveyard shift, he had felt like a savior. He was a university student back then, a handsome alpha with a warm, cedarwood scent that made my lonely, orphaned heart ache for comfort. He had courted me with such persistence. He brought me warm drinks during my breaks, walked me to my tiny apartment, and promised me a world where I would never have to worry about rent or safety again. When we got married, and he told me, "You don't need to work those nights anymore, Caleb. Just stay home. Cook warm meals for me. Let me take care of you." I had wept with gratitude. I hated those lonely, dangerous nights at the convenience store. I thought I was stepping into a fairy tale when we moved onto his parents' sprawling property, into a cottage they had built for us. I thought we were building a home, but the fairy tale had an expiration date, and it arrived the moment the fertility clinic results came back. Negative. Repeatedly negative. The warmth in Jacob's cedarwood scent turned sour, curdling into a bitter, resentful musk. The sweet promises dissolved into cold shoulder treatments, then into loud arguments, and finally, into the divorce papers slammed onto the kitchen table. Now, I was right back where I started. No, worse than where I started. I was 26, jobless, homeless, with exactly enough money in my debit account to survive for maybe 2 weeks if I rationed my meals to once a day. And I was completely alone. An orphan with no family to call, no friends left because I had allowed my world to shrink entirely around an alpha who ultimately threw me away like a defective appliance. Stupid? I muttered to myself, a hot tear finally spilling over my eyelashes and tracking down my cold cheek. "You were so incredibly stupid, Caleb." I pulled my thin jacket tighter around my shoulders, my body shivering. I didn't even know which bus I was waiting for. I just needed to go somewhere. Anywhere that wasn't here. The scuffing sound of small shoes against the concrete sidewalk pulled me out of my downward spiral. I blinked away my tears, rubbing my eyes with the back of my sleeve, and looked down the street. The sidewalk was mostly deserted, save for a tiny, moving figure about 20 yards away. I frowned, leaning forward to get a better look under the dim street lamps. It was a child, a ridiculously small child. He couldn't have been more than 3, maybe 4 years old at the absolute most. He was wearing a bright yellow jacket, but what caught my attention was the massive, bulky blue backpack strapped to his tiny shoulders. It was a backpack meant for a teenager, stuffed so full that it rounded out like a giant boulder. As I watched, the sheer top-heavy weight of the bag pulled the little boy backward. He let out a soft, oof, as his tiny feet lost traction, and he tumbled squarely onto his bottom on the hard concrete. My breath hitched. I half expected the child to burst into a loud, frantic wail. That's what normal toddlers did when they fell, especially in the dark, completely alone. Instead, the little boy just sat there for a second, his tiny shoulders rising and falling as he took a deep breath. Then, with a look of absolute, fierce determination on his chubby face, he grabbed the straps of his backpack, planted his hands on the ground, and pushed himself back up. His big, Round eyes were fixed straight ahead, completely resolute. He took 3 unstable, waddling steps, looking exactly like a tiny penguin, before the weight betrayed him again, and he went down a second time, his knees scraping against the pavement. What in the world is a baby doing out here alone? My mind raced, anger suddenly flaring through my chest. Where are his parents? How can anyone leave a child this precious, this small, to wander the streets at night? A bitter, familiar ache throbbed in my chest. Why does the universe give children to people who clearly aren't fit to be parents, while leaving people like me? I violently shook my head, cutting off the toxic thought. This wasn't about me. I looked back up to check on the boy, expecting to see him pushing himself up again, but my heart instantly stopped. He had abandoned the sidewalk. Driven by whatever singular mission was in his tiny head, he was stepping off the curb, directly into the crosswalk of the main road. And down the street, a pair of bright headlights was rapidly approaching. The car was speeding, the engine roaring in the quiet night. The driver clearly wasn't looking out for a 3-foot-tall toddler in the dark. No! The word tore from my throat before I could even process it. My duffel bag fell from my hands, completely forgotten, clattering onto the pavement as my legs took over. I hadn't run that fast in my entire life. The world turned into a blur of wind and adrenaline. The car was getting closer, the tires humming against the asphalt. The little boy had stopped in the middle of the lane, his big eyes turning toward the blinding headlights, freezing like a deer. I lunged. I threw my body forward, sliding across the cold asphalt, and wrapped my arms entirely around the tiny, soft frame of the boy. I pulled him tightly against my chest, tucking his head under my chin, and twisted my body so that my back faced the oncoming vehicle, acting as a human shield. I squeezed my eyes shut, holding the child so fiercely I was afraid I might bruise him, and waited for the crushing impact. Screech! The violent, deafening wail of burning rubber tore through the air. The smell of friction and exhaust fumes filled my nose. The car had swerved, its bumper coming to a halt mere inches from my hip. Are you out of your mind? Get the hell out of the road! The driver screamed, rolling down his window to shout a string of curses before slamming his foot on the gas and speeding away, leaving the scent of angry, agitated beta pheromones behind. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. My hands were shaking uncontrollably, but I couldn't let go. I stayed on the ground for a long moment, just breathing in the scent of the little boy. He smelled like baby powder, milk, and a faint, sweet hint of fresh rain. Slowly, carefully, I loosened my grip and looked down at him. Are you okay? Big boy, are you hurt somewhere? My voice was trembling, completely breathless. The little boy didn't answer right away. He just stared up at me. His eyes were impossibly large, dark, and perfectly round, reflecting the amber glow of the streetlights. For a second, his expression was completely blank, processing what had just happened. Then, his tiny lower lip began to tremble violently. Those huge eyes filled to the brim with giant, fat tears. "Oh, sweetheart," I whispered, my heart breaking into a million pieces. Before I could say anything else, the child clutched at the collar of my thin jacket with his tiny, chubby hands. He buried his face into the crook of my neck and let out a loud, heartbroken sob. It wasn't a tantrum. It was the sound of a completely terrified baby who had finally realized how scary the world was. He held on to me with a surprising amount of strength, his little body shaking against mine as the delayed shock of the near accident finally washed over him. "Sure, it's okay. I've got you. You're safe. I promise you're safe." I cooed, my own tears threatening to spill again. I carefully pushed myself up from the cold asphalt, lifting him into my arms. The heavy backpack made it awkward, so I unclipped the chest strap and let the massive bag drop to the ground, keeping one arm securely under the boy's bottom and the other hand gently patting his back in a slow, rhythmic motion. I walked back over to the bus stop, carrying him like he was the most precious, fragile glass sculpture in existence. I sat down on the bench, pulling him into my lap, never stopping the gentle rocking motion. "You're fine, baby. It's all okay." I've got you. It took a good 10 minutes of continuous rocking, whispering, and gentle back patting before the little boy's heavy sobs subsided into soft, hitching hiccups. He refused to untangle his little fingers from my shirt, keeping his face pressed firmly against my chest. "Hey there," I murmured softly, brushing a stray lock of soft, dark hair away from his damp forehead. "Are you feeling a little better?" He gave a tiny, barely perceptible nod against my collarbone. I looked down the street and noticed a small, brightly lit convenience store a block away. It had a glowing neon sign advertising ice cream. "How about we get some ice cream, huh? Would you like that?" The little boy stiffened, his head slowly lifting from my chest. He wiped his nose with the back of his sleeve, leaving a smudge on his cheek. His eyes were red and puffy, but the mention of ice cream had clearly struck a chord. "Stwabwe?" he whispered, his voice incredibly small and lispy. I couldn't help the soft, genuine smile that broke across my face. It was the first time I had smiled in days. "Yes, strawberry. As much as you want." I picked up my duffel bag with one hand and slung the child's backpack over my other shoulder and carried the boy down the block. He didn't protest. He just rested his chin on my shoulder, his large eyes watching my face with a mixture of awe and exhaustion. Inside the store, I bought a small cup of strawberry ice cream and a little first aid kit with the pocket change I had left. We sat down at a small plastic table in the corner of the store. I carefully peeled back the legs of his yellow trousers, and my heart twinged with pity. Both of his little knees were bright red, scraped and bleeding slightly from his multiple falls on the concrete. "Okay, buddy. This might sting just a little bit. Okay? But I'm going to make it all better," I said, opening an antiseptic wipe. As soon as the wet wipe touched his skin, the boy winced, his lips puckering up as he let out a sharp hiss. Tears immediately welled up in his eyes again. I know, it hurts," I said quickly. I leaned down and gently blew cool air onto his knee. "Look, I'm blowing the boo-boo away. Can you help me? Blow on it like this." I demonstrated, puffing out my cheeks. The toddler blinked, fascinated. He paused, swallowed a spoonful of strawberry ice cream, and then imitated me, blowing a tiny, harmless puff of air toward his own knee. "Good job. You're so brave," I cheered softly, quickly sticking a bright dinosaur-patterned bandage over the scrape. I did the same to the other knee, sealing it with another bandage. "There. All done. You're a superhero." The boy stared down at his knees, turning his legs side to side to admire the dinosaurs. The tears vanished, replaced by a look of sheer wonder. He took another large bite of ice cream, a smear of pink cream staining his upper lip. "What's your name, little superhero?" I asked gently, leaning my chin on my hand. "Luke," he mumbled around the spoon. "Luke, that is a very beautiful name," I said. "And how old are you, Luke?" He proudly held up 3 fingers, then after a second of intense thought, wiggled a 4th finger up. "Dis many. 3.5?" I smiled. He nodded vigorously. "All right, Luke, can you tell me what your daddy's name is? We need to find him." Luke swallowed his ice cream and looked at me like I had asked a very silly question. "Daddy is Daddy." I suppressed a chuckle. "Right? Of course. And what about your mommy? What is mommy's name?" The cheerful aura around the table vanished instantly. Luke's spoon dropped into the paper cup with a soft clink. His large eyes welled up with those heavy, fat tears all over again, his little shoulders slumping. "Don't have a mommy," he whispered, his voice trembling. "All the boys at school have a mommy. Toby has a mommy. Miho has a mommy. Luke doesn't. Daddy said mommy went away to the stars. So I took my bag, and I ran away from home to find her." A heavy, suffocating wave of heartache crashed over me. I looked at the massive backpack on the floor, stuffed with whatever a 3-year-old thought he needed to travel to the stars to find his mother. The sheer, innocent tragedy of it made my throat tighten so hard it hurt. I reached across the table and gently took his tiny, sticky hand in mine. "Oh, Luke." The local police station was cold, brightly lit by buzzing fluorescent bulbs, and smelled strongly of stale coffee and industrial disinfectant. I sat on a hard plastic chair, Luke still glued to my lap. The officers had been helpful, but because Luke couldn't provide a last name or an address, they were currently running through missing children reports from the surrounding wealthy districts. "Sir, we can take the child now," a kind beta officer said, reaching out his arms toward Luke. "You've done a wonderful job bringing him in, but you look exhausted. You can leave the rest to us." The moment the officer stepped closer, Luke let out a sharp, terrified shriek. He turned around, burying his face into my chest, and clutched the fabric of my rumpled shirt with a death grip. "No, no go. Stay, Caleb," he cried, his tiny voice echoing in the quiet station. He had learned my name during our walk over, and he was currently using it like a lifeline. "Luke, sweetie, the nice officer is going to help you find your daddy," I pleaded softly, trying to gently pry his little fingers away, but he only held on tighter, his little body shaking. "No, no, Caleb, stay." I looked up at the officer, apologetic. I don't mind staying for a little bit, until his father gets here. I don't really have anywhere else to be tonight anyway." The admission felt heavy and embarrassing, but it was the truth. My duffel bag sat by my feet, a constant reminder of my own pathetic reality. A half-hour passed in quiet tension before the glass doors of the station were practically thrown open. The air in the room shifted instantly. A heavy, suffocating, yet intoxicating scent flooded the station, cutting through the smell of stale coffee. It was the scent of dark cedarwood, rich leather, and the crisp, sharp metallic tang of winter air. A dominant alpha, a very powerful one. I stiffened, my heart racing at the sheer authority radiating from the newcomer. I looked up. The man stepping into the room was breathtakingly handsome, though currently completely disheveled. He looked to be in his early 30s, with sharp, aristocratic facial features, a strong jawline, and dark, intense eyes that scanned the room with frantic desperation. He was wearing an expensive, tailored three-piece charcoal suit, but the tie was pulled loose, his collar unbuttoned, and his dark hair was wildly messy, as if he had been running his hands through it for hours. "Luke!" the man choked out, his voice a deep, gravelly baritone. When his eyes landed on the couch where we sat, a visible wave of profound relief washed over his face. His shoulders sagging so violently, he looked like he might collapse. He strode over in long, urgent paces, dropping to his knees right in front of us. "Daddy!" Luke cried, though he still didn't let go of my shirt, keeping his lower half anchored to my lap while reaching his upper body out toward his father. The man pulled Luke into his arms, burying his face in the boy's hair. "God, Luke! Oh my God!" he muttered, his voice thick with unshed tears. For a long moment, they just held each other. But then, the relief in the alpha's scent began to curdle into sharp, agitated anger. He pulled back, gripping Luke's small shoulders, his dark eyebrows drawing together into a harsh scowl. He pressed his temples with one hand, looking utterly exhausted and furious. "Luke, why did you run away from the house? Do you have any idea what I went through? I was in the middle of a board meeting when the nanny called saying you were gone. Do you have any idea what happens to little boys who wander out into the city alone? What if something happened to you?" His voice had dropped an octave, vibrating with the natural authority of a commanding alpha. Luke flinched. The joy of seeing his father vanished, and he immediately shrank backward, hiding his tiny body behind my torso, clutching my trousers for protection. His big eyes filled with tears again. I went out to find a mommy," Luke sobbed, his voice cracking. "All my friends have one. Why can't I? Why can't Luke have a mommy?" The alpha's expression hardened, a flash of deep, agonizing pain crossing his features before turning back into frustration. He raised his voice another decibel. "How many times do I have to tell you, Luke, we don't? Please speak softly." The words left my mouth before my rational mind could stop them. Seeing Luke tremble like that made me completely reckless. The man snapped his head up, his dark eyes locking onto mine. Up close, his gaze was incredibly piercing. I know you must be incredibly distressed, I said, my voice shaking slightly, but I forced myself to look him in the eye. You've been worried sick as a father, and that is completely valid. But Luke has also been through a lot tonight. He's terrified, and shouting at him right now isn't going to make him understand. It's just going to make him hide. The alpha stared at me, completely taken aback. The heavy, oppressive pressure of his scent suddenly dialed back, softening into a muted, apologetic warmth. He blinked, as if finally truly noticing the person holding his son. You're right, the man murmured, rubbing his face with both hands. He let out a long, ragged sigh and stood up, straightening his crumpled suit jacket. He looked down at me, his expression softening. Hi, sorry. My name is Adrian. And you are? Before I could open my mouth to answer, Luke poked his head out from behind my hip, his small voice ringing out clearly through the station. He is my mommy from now on. The silence that followed Luke's grand proclamation was so loud you could hear the buzzing of the fluorescent lights overhead. My jaw practically dropped. I looked down at the toddler, my face burning with a sudden, intense heat. Luke, sweetie, no, I'm not. Adrian had a completely frozen expression, his eyes wide as he looked between his son and me. Luke, you can't just pick random people on the street and decide they're your mother. He's not random, Luke protested loudly, stamping his little shoe. He saved me. He has the dinosaur bandages, and he smells like warm sleep. He is my mommy. Adrian let out another exhausted sigh, pinching the bridge of his nose. He looked back at me, his dark eyes filled with a mixture of profound gratitude and deep embarrassment. I am incredibly sorry about him. The officers told me what happened before I came back here. They said you threw yourself in front of a car to shield him. I don't even have the words to properly thank you. You saved my son's life. Anyone would have done it? I said softly, looking down at my lap. I'm just glad he's safe. Adrian nodded slowly, his eyes lingering on my face for a moment before dropping down to the floor. That's when he noticed my duffel bag and the child's massive backpack resting beside it. The officers mentioned you were waiting at the bus stop, Adrian said, his tone turning polite and businesslike. Please let me give you a ride. Tell me where I should drop you off. It's the absolute least I can do. No need, I said quickly, a tight knot forming in my stomach. I stood up, carefully setting Luke down on his feet. The moment I did, the cold reality of my situation crashed back over me. I had to find a cheap 24-hour internet cafe or a terrible motel that would take my remaining cash. Really, it's fine. You should take Luke home and get some rest. No, please, let me, Adrian insisted, stepping forward. His dominant alpha presence was commanding, but not unkind. Where is your house? Where do you live? I'll drive you directly to your door. No, really, it's okay. Please, it's the middle of the night, and it's freezing outside. Let me properly thank you by ensuring you get home safely. Where do you live? I don't have anywhere to go. The words burst out of me, louder than I intended, practically a shout. The station fell dead silent again. My chest heaved, my throat tightening as a wave of intense humiliation washed over me. I looked away, staring intensely at the linoleum floor, wishing it would open up and swallow me whole. I was a grown man, standing in a police station, admitting to a wealthy, successful alpha that I was completely homeless. Adrian didn't say anything for a long moment. His eyes dropped to my single, pathetic canvas bag, then back to my rumpled, cheap clothes, and finally to my pale, exhausted face. He was an alpha. He could easily piece together the reality of my situation. Then please spend the night at our house. I snapped my head up, my eyes wide. What? No, I can't. Caleb, stay. Caleb, come home. Luke immediately cheered, grabbing the hem of my trousers and pulling on them like a little anchor. Daddy said yes. Caleb, come home. Adrian offered a small, weary, yet incredibly gentle smile. We have more than enough rooms in our house, and as you can see, Luke is absolutely not going to let you leave tonight without a fight. Please, Accept it as a small token of my gratitude. You'll have a warm bed, a hot shower, and we can figure things out in the morning." I looked down at Luke, whose big, round eyes were looking up at me with such pure, unadulterated hope. Then I looked at Adrian, whose scent had softened into a comforting, protective blanket of cedarwood, completely devoid of any threat. I was so tired. My body ached. My heart was bruised, and the thought of a warm bed was too alluring to fight against. "Okay," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Thank you." The drive to Adrian's house was completely silent. Adrian drove a luxury, high-end black SUV that glided smoothly over the asphalt. In the back seat, Luke had insisted on sitting right next to me. Within 5 minutes of hitting the road, the poor toddler had completely crashed. He was sound asleep, his head resting heavily against my thigh, his little mouth slightly open as he let out soft, rhythmic snores. Even in his deep sleep, his tiny, chubby fingers were still tangled firmly into the fabric of my shirt, unwilling to let go. I gently stroked his soft hair, looking out the window at the passing city lights. "The officers told me you mentioned a divorce." Adrian's deep voice suddenly broke the silence, his eyes fixed on the road ahead through the rearview mirror. I flinched slightly, my fingers pausing on Luke's hair. Yes, it was finalized today." "I'm sorry," Adrian said softly. "It's a terrible thing to go through, especially ending up with just a single bag." I let out a bitter, self-deprecating laugh. "It turns out that when you're a recessive omega who can't provide an alpha with a child, 2 years of marriage can be dissolved in about 20 minutes. I was told I was a dead end, broken. So yeah, I got kicked out of his family's property today. I hadn't intended to share that much, but the exhaustion made me weak, the words spilling out like a bleeding wound." Adrian's grip on the steering wheel tightened, his knuckles turning slightly white. His scent flared with a brief, sharp note of deep anger. Not directed at me, but at the situation. An alpha who discards his mate over something like that is no alpha at all. He's a coward. I blinked, looking at his profile in the dim light of the dashboard. A dominant alpha calling another alpha a coward for wanting a child. It felt strange. Healing but strange. A few minutes later, we pulled into a long, gated driveway that led up to a massive, beautiful modern estate surrounded by manicured gardens. It was a stunning house, but as we stepped inside, I couldn't help but notice how quiet and sterile it felt. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a luxury hotel. Luke didn't stir even when Adrian carefully lifted him from the back seat. We walked up a grand staircase to a beautifully decorated toddler's bedroom filled with toys. Together, we worked like a quiet, coordinated team to gently detach Luke's iron grip from my shirt and tuck him beneath a soft, heavy duvet. Luke let out a contented sigh, rolling onto his side, completely dead to the world. "Would you join me downstairs for a warm drink?" Adrian whispered, gesturing toward the door. "I think we both need one." I looked down at my clothes, a cheap, faded sweater and rumpled trousers from my convenience store days, and felt entirely out of place in this wealthy, pristine home. But I nodded anyway, following him down to a large, state-of-the-art kitchen. Adrian poured 2 mugs of hot chamomile tea and pushed one toward me across the marble island. He leaned against the counter, holding his own mug, his dark eyes fixed on me with intense seriousness. "You know, Luke is not a troublesome child," he started, his voice quiet in the empty house. I sipped the hot tea, the warmth spreading through my chest. "I can tell. Luke's mother, his name was Julian," Adrian said, his scent turning muted and laced with an old, dull ache. "It was an arranged marriage. Our families pushed us together because we were a dominant alpha and a dominant omega. Perfect genetic match. Julian never showed any signs of unhappiness. When he got pregnant with Luke, he looked genuinely happy. But less than a month after Luke was born, I came home from work to find an empty house. I paused, my mug halfway to my mouth. He left, Adrian said simply, a bitter edge to his voice. He left a single letter on the crib. It said he couldn't do this anymore. He wanted to go after his own true happiness, and apparently, his happiness lay with another alpha he had been seeing secretly. He said he was sad to leave Luke behind, but he knew I would take care of him. He moved abroad that same day. I haven't heard from him since. That's horrible, I whispered, my heart aching for the tiny baby left behind in a crib. Luke has no memory of him, Adrian continued, staring into his tea. But as he's gotten older, he's noticed. At preschool, all the other kids have mothers. Luke has been desperate for one. And because of that, we've had a lot of problems. In the last year alone, 4 different nannies have quit. Adrian rubbed his face, looking utterly defeated. Luke isn't a bad kid. He's incredibly sweet. But a year ago, we had an experience that completely shattered his ability to trust strangers. I won't go into the details right now, but it left him deeply traumatized. Since then, he has refused to let any nanny or helper come near him. He screams, he hides, he throws things. He has built a complete wall around himself. Adrian stepped closer, his dark eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my breath hitch. But tonight, I saw him cling to you. The officers told me he wouldn't let you go. I saw it myself. You are the first stranger Luke has ever let in since that incident a year ago. You saved his life, and somehow your presence, it bypassed all his walls. I swallowed hard. He's a precious boy, Adrian. He was just terrified. Which brings me to a proposal, Adrian said, setting his mug down. I want to offer you a job. Contract. Stay here for 1 year. Act as Luke's primary caretaker. In return, you will have full room and board in this house, all your expenses covered, and at the end of the year, I will pay you a sum of money that will ensure you never have to worry about financial stability or working a graveyard shift ever again. By that time, Luke will be older, more adjusted, and hopefully more comfortable with people. It gives you a fresh start, and it gives my son the stability he desperately needs. I sat there, completely stunned. This was nothing less than a godsend. A literal miracle dropped out of the sky right when I was at my absolute lowest point. It solved every single one of my immediate problems: housing, food, employment, security. But as I looked at Adrian and thought about the tiny, sweet boy sleeping upstairs, a cold spike of fear pierced my chest. If I take this, I'll get attached. I knew myself. I was a broken omega with a desperate, lonely heart. If I stayed here, if I allowed myself to care for this beautiful child and live alongside this captivating alpha, it would destroy me when the year ended. It's just a job, I whispered to myself, trying to build a wall of my own. I looked up at Adrian and nodded. Okay, I accept, but we keep it strictly professional. I am here to do a job, and when the year is up, I will leave. Adrian looked at me, his expression unreadable, before nodding slowly. A deal then. The next morning, my resolution to keep it strictly professional was violently dismantled at exactly 6:30 a.m. I awoke to a heavy, soft weight suddenly dropping squarely onto my stomach. I gasped, my eyes snapping open, only to find myself staring directly into a pair of impossibly bright, glittering dark eyes. Luke was sitting on my chest, wearing a pair of light blue pajamas covered in tiny cartoon stars. His chubby cheeks were flushed with excitement, a massive, brilliant smile lighting up his entire face. "Caleb, awake!" he cheered, bouncing up and down on my poor stomach. "Daddy told me. Daddy said Caleb stay with us forever and ever." "Not forever, sweetie, just for a bit," I gasped out, my voice thick with sleep as I gently caught his hips to stop the bouncing. But before I could fully correct him, Luke leaned forward and threw his chubby arms entirely around my neck, burying his face in my shoulder. He gave me a hug so fierce, so full of pure, unadulterated toddler love, that all the air left my lungs for a completely different reason. "Luke is so happy," he whispered into my neck, his tiny voice vibrating against my skin. So happy." A sudden, overwhelming wave of emotion crashed over me. My eyes burned, and my arms moved entirely on their own instinct, wrapping tightly around his small frame, pulling him against my chest, and in that single moment, I knew I was completely doomed. The wall I had tried to build last night hadn't even survived 12 hours. As the days turned into weeks, Luke proved to be the most wonderfully adorable, loving child I had ever encountered. And he had developed a very specific, heartbreakingly sweet habit. Throughout the day, no matter what we were doing, Luke would suddenly stop, run off to his room or the garden, and return with a random object clutched tightly in his chubby fist. "For you," he would say, looking up at me with those massive round eyes, his expression deeply serious as he placed the item into my palm. To keep. On Monday, it was his absolute favorite, slightly chewed plastic T-Rex toy. On Wednesday, it was a slightly crushed, half-eaten piece of strawberry hard candy he had managed to find in a kitchen drawer. On Friday, he marched inside from the courtyard and solemnly handed me a smooth, unremarkable gray pebble from the garden path. "To keep," he repeated, nodding firmly. Took me a while to understand the heartbreaking psychology behind it. He was a 3-year-old boy trying to buy my stay. He was giving me his most prized possessions, offering everything he had in his little world, because he was terrified that if he didn't, I would pack my single canvas bag and disappear just like his mother had. Every time he handed me a pebble or a toy, my heart would ache with a deep, profound sorrow, and I would pull him into a tight hug, promising him that I was keeping it forever. Nap times were another battle of pure, stubborn cuteness. Luke refused to close his eyes unless I was lying down right next to him, holding his hand. He would drift off, his breathing slowing, his long eyelashes fluttering shut. But the moment I thought he was fully asleep and tried to gently, millimeter by millimeter, slide my hand out of his grip, his tiny fingers would instantly tighten like a miniature iron vise. His eyes would snap open just a tiny crack, his little brow furrowing into a pout as he looked to ensure I hadn't moved. "Stay," he would mumble sleepily, pulling my hand back to his chest. I would be forced to just sit there, frozen on the edge of his bed for hours, staring down at his beautiful, peaceful sleeping face. I would look at his tiny fingers wrapped around mine, and the realization would hit me like a physical blow. This isn't a job. It can never just be a job. By the second month, Luke entered what the house staff fondly called the duckling phase. Luke used to insist on wearing a bright green dinosaur hoodie every single day, refusing to take it off until it practically needed to be pried from his body for washing. But suddenly, he completely abandoned the hoodie. Instead, every morning he would stand outside my closet, watching what I chose to wear. If I wore a plain white t-shirt and gray sweatpants, Luke would march back to his room, scream at the housemaids until they found him a plain white t-shirt and gray trousers, and proudly strut back into the living room, looking like a miniature, pint-sized clone of me. He followed me everywhere, a tiny, determined shadow. If I sat on the couch to read, he would grab a picture book, sit exactly 2 inches away from me, cross his legs in the exact same manner, and sigh heavily just like I did. One afternoon, I grabbed a microfiber cloth and began to dust the low coffee tables in the living room. Luke immediately scrambled to his feet, ran to the kitchen, demanded a cloth from the head housekeeper, and marched back. He knelt down right next to me, his little tongue poking out of the corner of his mouth in intense concentration, as he began to furiously rub the exact same spot on the table I had just cleaned. "Look, Caleb, I help, just like you," he chirped, wiping his sweaty brow with the back of his hand, a gesture he had entirely copied from me. I had to bite my lip to keep from crying out from the sheer, overwhelming cuteness of it. He was a little duckling, imprinting on me with everything he had. Adrian was a man of his word. Despite running a multi-billion-dollar corporation, he made it a strict point to come home early every single evening. The dynamic in the house shifted when he arrived. The quiet, sterile mansion began to feel alive. We would all eat dinner together at the massive dining table, though Luke always insisted on sitting directly between Adrian and me, frequently grabbing both of our hands at the same time to force us to look at his drawings. At night, Luke would toddle into my bedroom, dragging a massive storybook behind him, and climb into my bed. Once he fell asleep, Adrian would walk in, and together we would carefully lift the sleeping boy to carry him back to his own room. Those quiet midnight moments, standing side by side over Luke's crib, breathing in the rich, comforting scent of Adrian's cedarwood mixing with Luke's rain scent, warmed my heart in ways I was terrified to admit. But the peace was shattered one Tuesday afternoon. Luke was taking his afternoon nap, and I decided to deep clean the tall wooden bookshelves in the study. As I reached up to wipe down the top shelf, my cloth caught on a small, glossy black object hidden neatly behind a heavy leather-bound encyclopedia. The object tumbled down, clattering onto the hardwood floor. I blinked, kneeling down to pick it up. It was a tiny, high-tech camera lens, completely wireless, blinking with a faint, steady blue light. I looked around the room, my eyes suddenly sharper. Now that I knew what to look for, I noticed another tiny, microscopic lens hidden inside the frame of the wall clock, and another one tucked into the leaves of a faux plant in the corner. The house was completely wiretapped. Hidden cameras were everywhere. After Luke was tucked into bed, I waited for Adrian in the living room. When he walked down the stairs, unbuttoning his vest, he paused when he saw my expression. I held out my hand, opening my palm to reveal the tiny black camera lens I had found in the study. I didn't say it accusatorially. My voice was just quiet. I found this while cleaning the study today, Adrian. And a few others. Adrian stiffened. His dark eyes locked onto the camera in my hand, and for a fraction of a second, a flash of deep guilt and vulnerability crossed his handsome features. He let out a slow, heavy breath and walked over, sitting down on the opposite armchair. "I owe you an explanation," Adrian said, his baritone voice quiet. "And an apology." "I am sorry, Caleb. I should have told you." I set the lens down on the coffee table. "No, you don't owe me anything, Adrian. I understand. I was just shocked to find them. It's just, I thought I had your trust." "It wasn't about you," Adrian said urgently, leaning forward. His scent flared, turning thick, heavy, and deeply distressed, desperate to comfort my suddenly anxious chamomile scent. "A year ago, I told you we had an incident with a nanny. I didn't give you the details, but you deserve to know now." Adrian tightly clenched his fists on his knees. "We hired a woman. She had a flawless resume, glowing recommendations, a master's degree in child psychology. When I was around, she was an angel. She was sweet, attentive, and Luke seemed okay. But after a couple of months, I noticed Luke's personality completely changing. He stopped talking. He stopped playing. He would flinch if anyone raised their hand too quickly near him. Adrian's jaw clenched so hard the muscles jumped. To find out what was happening, I had a security firm install those hidden cameras throughout the house without telling anyone. And the very first day I left for work after they were installed, I watched the live feed from my office. Adrian's voice cracked, a rare display of raw, unfiltered alpha fury and heartbreak. The moment the front door closed behind me, that woman transformed into a monster. She would shout at Luke over the smallest things. She would shake him, and worse, she used psychological abuse. I watched her look my 2-year-old son in the eye and tell him, "Your mother left you because you are a bad boy. You are broken and no one wants you. If you don't behave, your father is going to leave you too, and you'll be completely alone on the streets." A gasp tore from my throat, my hands flying to cover my mouth. Hot, furious tears instantly flooded my eyes. How could anyone say that to a baby? I fired her that exact same hour, filed criminal charges, and had her blacklisted from the industry. Adrian whispered, his eyes dark with a lingering, protective rage. But the damage was done. That is why Luke stopped trusting strangers. That is why he was out there that night with a backpack, trying to find his mother because he thought he was a bad boy. And that is why, when I brought a new person into this house, even someone who saved his life, I had to be certain. I had to protect my son. I am a father first, Caleb. I did what I had to do. I looked at Adrian, this powerful, wealthy alpha who had been carrying the terrifying burden of protecting his traumatized child entirely alone, terrified of failing him again. "I understand," I said softly, my voice thick with emotion. "You don't need to apologize, Adrian. If I were in your shoes, I would have done the exact same thing." Adrian snapped his head up, staring at me. He looked completely disarmed by my lack of anger. He slowly stood up from his chair, walked over to the couch where I sat, and knelt down right in front of me, bringing himself to my eye level just as he did with Luke. He reached out, his large, warm hand hesitating for a fraction of a second before gently cupping my cheek. His thumb softly brushed away a stray tear that had escaped my eyes. His scent expanded, turning incredibly sweet, rich, and profoundly tender. "Thank you, Caleb," Adrian whispered, his dark eyes searching mine with an intensity that made my heart violently thud against my ribs. "But it's been 3 months now. I've watched you care for my son with more love, patience, and genuine kindness than anyone I've ever known. I don't need those cameras anymore. I know. I can trust you completely, Caleb." The touch of his warm hand against my skin sent a sudden, electric shiver straight down my spine. My breath hitched, my faint chamomile scent flaring to life, reaching out to wrap around his commanding cedarwood. The air in the room shifted, thick with a sudden, heavy tension that had nothing to do with the contract, and everything to do with the raw, undeniable pull between an alpha and an omega. After that night, the atmosphere in the house changed completely. It wasn't a dramatic explosion, but rather a slow, beautiful thawing of the professional boundaries we had set. I became agonizingly, exquisitely aware of Adrian's presence. When we all sat on the living room floor playing with Luke's wooden train sets, I could feel Adrian's intense, dark gaze burning into the side of my face. Whenever I looked up to catch him staring, he wouldn't look away. Instead, a slow, breathtaking smile would curve his lips, making my heart flutter like a trapped butterfly. Then came the touches that lasted just a little bit too long to be accidental. When handing me a coffee mug in the morning, his fingers would brush against mine, lingering for a beat, sending a wave of heat traveling up my arm. When we walked up the stairs together after tucking Luke in, his hand would gently rest on the small of my back, guiding me with a protective warmth that made my breath slow down, my body leaning unconsciously into his side. A constant, electric tension hung in the air between us, thick and heavy, waiting for a single spark to set it ablaze. The spark arrived during a violent midnight thunderstorm in the 4th month. A deafening crack of thunder shook the entire mansion, followed by the aggressive rattling of rain against the glass windows. I snapped awake in my bedroom, my instincts instantly alerting me. "Luke!" I threw off my covers, running down the dark hallway in my bare feet, and pushed open Luke's bedroom door. The poor toddler was completely hidden beneath his heavy duvet, a small, trembling ball of pure terror. I walked over quickly, sitting on the edge of the mattress, and pulled back the blanket. Luke's face was soaked with tears, his little eyes wide and panicked. "Mommy!" he shrieked, throwing himself into my arms the moment a flash of lightning illuminated the room. He had been calling me Mommy more and more frequently lately, and I had entirely stopped correcting him after too many failed attempts. "Shoo, I'm here, baby. It's just the sky being noisy. It can't hurt you," I cooed, wrapping my arms tightly around him, rocking him back and forth. The door to the bedroom opened wider, and Adrian stepped inside. He was wearing nothing but a pair of dark gray sweatpants, his broad chest bare, his hair messy from sleep. He looked frantic, his scent thick with protective worry. "Is he okay?" Adrian asked, his deep baritone vibrating in the quiet room. "He's just terrified of the thunder," I whispered, brushing Luke's wet hair back. "I've got him." Adrian walked over, the sheer sight of his massive, powerful physique making my throat dry. He sat down on the other side of the toddler bed, his large hand coming to rest over Luke's back, rubbing soothing circles. With both of us holding him, Luke's trembling slowly stopped. The heavy presence of his alpha father and the soothing, warm scent of his caretaker acted like an instant sedative. Within minutes, Luke's eyes grew heavy, his little body relaxing completely between us. "He's asleep," I murmured softly, preparing to slide off the bed to leave them. "I'll head back to my room now that he's calm." But as I moved, Luke let out a soft, subconscious whine, his little hands reaching out blindly. One hand caught the hem of my t-shirt, while the other clutched Adrian's wrist. No, stay, Luke mumbled in his sleep, anchoring both of us to the mattress. Adrian looked across the small bed at me, his dark eyes glittering in the dim light. Stay, Caleb. Don't leave him. Don't leave us. My heart hammered so loudly against my ribs I was terrified Adrian would hear it with his enhanced alpha senses. I slowly nodded, lowering my head back down onto the pillow on the left side of the bed. Adrian lay down on the right side with Luke tucked safely, perfectly in the middle. The bed was small, forcing our bodies to be close. In the darkness, I turned my head, only to find Adrian already staring at me. He was so close I could feel the radiant, intoxicating heat of his bare skin. His dark eyes were fixed on mine with a raw, intense hunger that made my core ache. We didn't speak a single word. We just lay there in the quiet room, surrounded by the crashing storm outside, our scents completely tangling together. A thick, beautiful shield of cedarwood and chamomile protecting the sleeping boy between us. I fell asleep that night feeling safer than I ever had in my entire life. The following weekend, Adrian insisted on taking us out to a beautiful, family-friendly restaurant in the city center to celebrate Luke's upcoming enrollment into a new preschool. It was a wonderful afternoon. Luke had spent the entire meal coloring on the paper tablecloth, giggling as Adrian deliberately let his son feed him a messy piece of broccoli. We looked exactly like a real happy family. At the end of the meal, Adrian stood up, pulling his wallet out. I'll head down to the underground parking structure to bring the car around to the front curb, so you and Luke don't have to walk through the cold wind. Wait for me in the lobby. All right? He leaned down, his hand gently resting on my shoulder, squeezing it with a tender warmth. I'll be right back, Caleb. Okay, be careful. I smiled up at him. I took Luke's small hand, guiding him out of the main dining room into the large, crowded marble lobby of the restaurant. Luke was bouncing on his heels, proudly showing me a drawing of a dinosaur he had crumpled in his other hand. Look, Caleb, it's a green one, like my old hoodie. It's beautiful, sweetie. You did such a good. A sudden, aggressive grip clamped down violently around my wrist. I gasped, my body jerking forward as I was yanked backward. I snapped my head around. Standing right in front of me, his hand tightly bruising my wrist, was Jacob, my ex-husband. He looked exactly the same, yet completely different. His expensive clothes were slightly wrinkled, his face flushed, his eyes wild and bloodshot as he stared at me. The moment he recognized me, a thick wave of possessive, toxic alpha pheromones erupted from him. Caleb? God, it is you, Jacob choked out, his grip tightening. I've been looking everywhere for you. I went to your old apartment. I called your number. You completely vanished. Jacob, let go of me. I panicked, trying to wrench my wrist out of his grip, but my strength was nothing against him. Let me go. What are you doing here? We're divorced. Caleb, listen to me. I made a mistake. Jacob pleaded loudly, stepping closer, completely ignoring my distress. I was crazy. My parents were pressuring me, and I lost my mind. The house is so empty without you. No one cooks for me, no one takes care of the place like you do. I don't care about the kid thing anymore. Okay? We can just live together. I regret it, Caleb. Come back home with me. I stared at him, a cold, sickening horror washing over my stomach. He didn't want me. He wanted a housekeeper. He wanted the submissive, quiet Omega who would sit at home and take his insults. No, I shouted, my voice shaking. Get away from me, Jacob. It's over. Suddenly, Jacob's eyes dropped downward, noticing the small child standing right beside my legs. Luke had frozen, his big eyes wide with terror, his tiny body trembling as he hid behind my trousers, clutching my leg. Jacob's eyebrows drew together into a harsh, ugly scowl. His scent turned incredibly foul. Who the hell is this kid? Caleb, what is this? Did you replace me already? With some brat? Jacob reached out his other hand, aggressively moving to push Luke away from my leg. Get this thing away from HH. A sudden, terrifying shadow fell over the lobby. A hand of pure iron clamped around Jacob's wrist. With a single, violent twist, Jacob was ripped entirely away from me, his grip on my wrist breaking instantly as he was slammed backward against a heavy marble pillar. Adrian stood between us. His dominant alpha aura exploded through the crowded lobby like a shockwave. It was so thick, so violently dark and terrifying, that several betas in the room instantly dropped their heads, gasping for air. His scent was a roaring wildfire of burning cedarwood and lethal, protective fury. His dark eyes were dead, black pits of absolute malice as he stared down at Jacob. If you ever touch my Omega, or come within 10 feet of my child again, Adrian's voice dropped into an incredibly low, demonic alpha growl that vibrated through the floorboards. I will personally ensure you spend the rest of your pathetic life behind bars. Or worse, get out of my sight before I lose my temper. Jacob was trembling violently, his face turning completely pale as the sheer, crushing weight of a dominant alpha's command pressed down on his chest. He couldn't even speak. He just stumbled backward, turned around, and practically ran out of the restaurant lobby, his tail completely tucked between his legs. The moment Jacob vanished, the lethal aura around Adrian vanished with him. He turned around instantly, his face melting into a look of profound, frantic worry. He dropped to his knees, his large hands gently grabbing my shoulders. "Caleb, are you okay? Did he hurt you?" Adrian's voice was shaking, his eyes scanning my face, his thumb gently rubbing the red, bruised skin of my wrist where Jacob had held me. I couldn't speak. My chest was heaving, tears finally spilling over my eyes. Not from sadness, but from the sheer shock and the incredible, overwhelming sense of being protected. No one had ever fought for me like that. No one had ever stood up for me. I'm okay," I sobbed out softly. Adrian reached down with one hand, scooping Luke up into the embrace, holding both of us tightly against his chest right there in the middle of the crowded lobby. The ride back to the estate was charged with a heavy, electric silence. Luke had been completely shaken by the confrontation, refusing to leave my arms for even a second. Once we arrived home, I carried him straight up to my bedroom, laying him down on my bed. I lay beside him for an hour, stroke his hair and singing softly until his breathing finally leveled out into a deep, exhausted sleep. I carefully slid out of the bed, ensuring his little fingers didn't catch my shirt this time, and stepped out into the dimly lit hallway, quietly closing the door behind me. The moment I turned around, my breath hitched. Adrian was standing right there, leaning against the opposite wall. He had changed into a simple black t-shirt, his dark eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made the air in the hallway feel thin. The protective, possessive edge in his cedarwood scent was still simmering right beneath the surface, thick and intoxicating. "Is he asleep?" Adrian whispered, his baritone voice sending a delicious shiver down my spine. "Yes," I murmured, stepping closer. I stopped exactly 1 foot away from him, looking up into his piercing gaze. My heart was pounding like a war drum. The last string of restraint keeping us apart broke into pieces. Adrian let out a low, ragged growl and lunged forward. His large hands slammed against the wall on either side of my head, trapping me against the wood. Before I could even gasp, his lips crashed onto mine. The kiss was an absolute explosion of 3 months of suppressed desire, hunger, and unadulterated passion. It wasn't gentle. It was possessive, demanding, and utterly intoxicating. Adrian parted my lips with his tongue, tasting me deeply, his scent flaring into a thick, dominant wave of pure alpha lust that completely overwhelmed my senses. I let out a soft, helpless moan into his mouth, my hands flying up to wrap around his neck, my fingers tangling into his soft, dark hair as I pulled him closer. I arched my body into his, my small frame completely swallowed by his massive, muscular physique. Adrian groaned deep in his throat, his hands leaving the wall to slide down my body. One hand gripped the back of my neck, holding me steady as he tilted my head to deepen the kiss, while his other hand clamped firmly around my waist, pulling my hips flush against his hard thighs. Our scents collided, mixing together in a beautiful, chaotic storm. The rich, dark cedarwood completely wrapping around and intensifying my sweet, delicate chamomile. It was the scent of a true mate. Recessive or not, my body recognized him completely. Adrian pulled back for a fraction of a second, his breath hot against my lips, before trailing his mouth down my jawline, biting softly at the sensitive skin of my neck. I gasped, throwing my head back, my fingers digging into his shoulders as a wave of intense, delicious heat pooled deep in my stomach. "Caleb?" Adrian choked out, his voice thick with a raw, primal hunger as his lips found mine again. "God, Caleb, I've wanted this for so long. You have no idea what you've done to me. Adrian, please." I whimpered against his mouth, completely drunk on his pheromones, matching his desperation with my own. It was a spicy, breathless, incredibly passionate tangle of lips, hands, and skin right there in the dark hallway. We held on to each other like drowning men, marking each other with our scents, completely erasing the boundaries of employer and employee. From that night on, the contract was dead. We were bound by something far more powerful than a legal document. 2 months passed in a blur of pure, domestic bliss. The house was no longer sterile. It was filled with the sound of laughter, music, and the beautiful scent of a mated alpha and omega. Luke had officially started calling me mommy full-time, and every time the word left his chubby lips, a profound sense of completeness would wash over me. Adrian and I shared a bed every night, our bodies and hearts becoming completely intertwined. I had forgotten about the contract entirely, until the calendar reached the final week of the 1-year mark. A heavy, anxious knot began to form in my stomach. Adrian hadn't made a single comment about the contract ending. He hadn't mentioned renewing it, nor had he brought up marriage or a permanent mating mark. The old, deeply buried insecurities of being a temporary broken omega began to rear their ugly heads again. What if this was all just part of the deal for him? What if the year ends, and he expects me to leave? The answer arrived on a fateful Sunday afternoon. Adrian was in the kitchen, happily baking a batch of chocolate chip cookies with Luke. The kitchen was a complete disaster area, covered in flour, with Luke giggling hysterically as he wore a makeshift chef's hat. I was sitting at the dining table, watching them with a soft smile, when the front doorbell rang loudly through the house. "I'll get it," I called out, wiping my hands on an apron. I walked across the grand foyer and opened the massive front door, expecting a package delivery. The smile on my face froze instantly. The blood drained entirely from my cheeks. Standing on the doorstep was a breathtakingly beautiful man. He looked to be in his late 20s, with flawless porcelain skin, elegant, striking features, and a sleek head of perfectly styled silver blonde hair. He was wearing an incredibly expensive designer trench coat, and radiating from him was a sharp, vivid, and incredibly powerful scent of sweet, heavy jasmine. A dominant omega. Beside him stood an older, stern-looking alpha man in a sharp suit, Adrian's father. I knew the beautiful omega instantly. I had seen his face once before, in an old framed photograph hidden away in the attic. It was Julian, Luke's biological mother. "Who is at the door, Caleb?" Adrian's voice echoed from the hallway. He walked into the foyer, wiping flour from his hands, but the moment his eyes landed on the 2 figures at the door, he stopped dead in his tracks. The warmth in the air vanished, replaced by a sudden, suffocating ice. "What are you doing here?" Adrian's voice dropped into a dangerous, deadly whisper. Julian's beautiful eyes immediately filled with tears. He stepped forward, his hands reaching out dramatically. "Adrian, oh my God, Adrian, please, just let me speak." He burst into a soft, elegant sob, covering his face with his manicured hands. "I made such a horrible mistake. I was young, I was stupid, and I was manipulated. The alpha I ran away with, he abused me, Adrian. He ruined me. I've spent every single day for the past 3 years weeping, regretting the day I left my beautiful baby boy. I'm back to make things right. I want my family back, Adrian. I want my son." Adrian's father stepped forward, his voice cold and authoritative. "Adrian, let us inside." Julian has realized his mistakes, and as his family, we have agreed to support this reconciliation. This is what is best for Luke. A child needs his true, biological dominant Omega mother, not whatever temporary help you've hired to fill the space. His cold eyes flicked over my cheap apron, dripping with undisguised contempt. Get out, Adrian growled, his fists clenching so hard his knuckles popped. Adrian, be reasonable, his father snapped, his voice turning threatening. If you refuse to cooperate, we will take this to the high courts. Your mother and I will fund a massive, high-profile custody battle that will drag your name through the mud and put Luke through a traumatic legal circus. Do you want your son subjected to that? Let Julian stay in the guest room temporarily. Let him try to bond with his son. If it doesn't work, we will drop the matter. But you will give the biological mother a chance. The threat of a custody battle, a legal circus that would completely shatter Luke's fragile, recovering psychological state, was a lethal blow. Adrian stood there, his chest heaving, trapped in a corner by his own flesh and blood. He looked back at me, his dark eyes filled with a sudden, agonizing helplessness. Fine, Adrian squeezed out through his teeth, his scent turning completely toxic with stress. 1 week, in the guest room. But if you come near my son without permission, I will throw you out myself. Julian did not stay quietly. Over the next 3 days, the mansion turned into a psychological war zone. Julian tried with everything he had to force a bond with Luke. He brought expensive, imported toys, baked elaborate sweets, and tried to use his dominant jasmine scent to soothe the child. But Luke wanted absolutely nothing to do with him. Whenever Julian stepped into a room, Luke would let out a small whine, turn around, and sprint across the floor to bury his face into my lap, crying out clearly, "Mommy, Mommy, make the jasmine smell go away. I don't like it. Caleb is my mommy." Every single time it happened, a deeply hurt, agonizing expression would flash across Julian's beautiful face. On the 4th afternoon, while Adrian was away at the office dealing with an emergency board meeting, Luke was playing in the courtyard. I walked into the kitchen to pour a glass of water, only to find Julian standing there, wiping tears from his eyes with a silk handkerchief. He turned around, his beautiful face hardening into a cold, sharp mask as he looked at me. "You know, Caleb," Julian said, his voice quiet but dripping with desperation, "I am not saying it isn't my fault that Luke is like this with me. I made a mistake and I am paying for it. But with you here, this will never change." He stepped closer, his powerful jasmine scent flaring in an attempt to intimidate my recessive chamomile. "I saw the paperwork in Adrian's study. I know your 1-year contract is about to end this week. I am begging you as his real mother, please leave before the date arrives. You are a temporary fixture here. You won't stay forever. But the longer you linger, the more difficult it will be for Luke to adjust to this new dynamic. Don't be selfish, Caleb. Luke deserves a complete, biological, perfect family. And you are standing in the way of that." The words felt like a physical blade piercing straight through my heart. A temporary fixture. A broken, recessive Omega standing in the way of a perfect family. The old demons screamed in my head, tearing down my confidence. I clutched the edge of the counter, forcing myself to stand tall. Adrian is my employer. I will leave when he tells me to leave, not a second before. But the universe didn't care about my bravery. That very evening, Adrian received an urgent, catastrophic phone call from his international branch in Europe. A legal and financial crisis had arisen that required his immediate, physical presence across the ocean. "I have to go, Caleb," Adrian said frantically, packing a briefcase in our bedroom. His scent was completely frayed with anxiety. "It's a trap, I know it is. My father probably engineered this crisis to get me out of the country. But if I don't go, the board will strip my executive powers, and I'll lose the financial leverage I need to fight the custody suit. I'll be back in 48 hours, I promise you. Take care of Luke." He pulled me into a fierce, desperate kiss, pressing his forehead against mine. The moment Adrian's plane cleared the runway, the trap snapped shut. The next morning, the front doors of the mansion were violently pushed open. Adrian's father marched inside, flanked by Julian and 4 large, imposing men in dark security suits. "What is the meaning of this?" I shouted, running down the stairs, instinctively pulling Luke behind my back. "Caleb, your contract ends today," Adrian's father announced coldly, holding up a legal document. "Adrian is currently unreachable over the Atlantic, and as the head of the family estate, I am executing the clause. We are taking Luke with us to my estate. Julian is taking his son." "No!" I screamed, my voice cracking. "You can't do this. Wait for Adrian." The 2 security guards strode forward, completely ignoring my cries. They reached out, their massive hands easily pinning my shoulders back against the staircase railing. "Mommy! Mommy!" Luke shrieked in absolute terror as Julian stepped forward, grabbing the screaming toddler into his arms. Luke was kicking, scratching, and crying so hard his face turned purple. He reached his tiny, chubby arms out toward me through the air, his little fingers straining to touch mine. "Luke, my baby, no, let him go." I sobbed violently, thrashing against the iron grip of the guards. But I was completely helpless against the heavy security men. They forcefully dragged Luke out the front door, his heartbroken, terrified screams echoing through the empty courtyard until the sound was violently cut off by the closing door of a black car. They threw me to the floor, dropping my single canvas duffel bag beside me. "Your employment is terminated. Leave the property," Adrian's father spat, turning around and walking away. I didn't leave the property. Couldn't. I spent the next 24 hours in a state of absolute, unadulterated agony. I called Adrian's phone every single minute. "The number you are trying to reach is currently switched off or out of coverage area." The automated voice felt like a mockery, driving me to the brink of insanity. I paced back and forth across the empty living room, my vision completely blurred by a continuous, unstoppable torrent of hot tears. I ran up to Luke's bedroom, throwing myself onto his small bed. "Why?" I screamed into the empty room, my voice ragged and broken. "Why?" But I had no claim. Legally, I was nothing more than a paid nanny whose contract had expired. I was a ghost in their lives, an interloper with an empty womb and a broken heart. I dragged my exhausted, trembling body down to the front foyer. I collapsed into the corner right beside the front door, pulling my knees tightly against my chest. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I just stared intensely at the heavy wooden door, my eyes wide and bloodshot, desperately praying for a miracle. Hoping against hope that the door would burst open and my beautiful, laughing little boy would come running back to me. Morning arrived, the cold gray light of dawn filtering through the high glass windows of the foyer. My body was completely numb, my throat raw from crying, my faint chamomile scent entirely curdled into a sour note of absolute hopelessness. I was just a shell of a person, staring blankly at the wood. Click! The sound of the lock turning felt like a hallucination. I blinked, my breath catching in my throat as the massive front door slowly swung open. Standing on the threshold, his small yellow jacket wrinkled, his large eyes overflowing with giant, fat tears, was Luke. He looked exhausted, his tiny shoulders slumping, but the moment his eyes landed on me sitting in the corner, his entire face lit up with a raw, desperate gasp. He threw his tiny arms out wide through the air, his little legs moving as fast as they could as he toddled over the marble floor toward me. "Mommy! Mommy!" he cried out, his voice cracking with a year's worth of built-up longing. My heart violently stopped, then exploded into a million pieces. I leaped up from the floor, my legs shaking, and sprinted forward. I dropped to my knees, throwing my arms entirely around his tiny, soft body, pulling him against my chest so fiercely that I thought I might absorb him into my very skin. "My baby! Oh my God, my baby!" I sobbed hysterically, burying my face into his soft neck, breathing in his beautiful rain scent. He was here. He was real. He hadn't vanished. Luke clutched at my shirt with his usual iron vice grip, his little body shaking with heavy, ragged sobs as he buried his face into my shoulder. A pair of heavy, polished leather shoes stepped through the doorway. I looked up through my tears. Adrian stood there. He looked completely feral. His suit was torn, his tie completely gone, his dark eyes bloodshot and wild, his scent a terrifying, commanding roar of absolute dominant alpha authority. But as he looked down at Luke and me holding each other on the floor, the ferocity in his face completely dissolved into a look of profound, aching reverence. He walked over, dropping to his knees beside us, and wrapped his massive arms around both of us, pulling us into his chest. "Julian is gone. Caleb," Adrian whispered, his voice trembling, thick with raw emotion as he kissed the side of my head. "Not him, not my parents. No one will ever be able to touch us again. It's over. I've destroyed them." An hour later, the storm had finally passed. Luke had been thoroughly bathed, fed a warm bowl of soup, and was currently fast asleep in the middle of our large bed. His little hand anchored firmly into the fabric of my sweater even in his deep slumber. Adrian sat beside me on the edge of the mattress, holding a warm cup of tea. He looked exhausted, but his dark eyes were fixed on me with a clarity that frightened me. "I hired a private investigator the moment Julian showed up," Adrian said softly, his deep baritone cutting through the quiet room. "I knew his sudden, motherly regret was a lie, and I found the dirt. Caleb, the alpha Julian ran away with abroad, didn't abuse him. He abandoned him after Julian's spending habits drove them into millions of dollars of international debt. Julian was facing jail time abroad for fraud." Adrian let out a cold, bitter laugh. "And as for my parents, their corporation has been on the verge of bankruptcy for the past 6 months due to terrible investments. They didn't bring Julian back because they cared about Luke. They engineered this entire custody threat as a massive extortion plot. They wanted to force me into a legal settlement that would give Julian a massive monthly stipend from my money that would be immediately funneled back to pay off his debts and save my parents' bankruptcy." Adrian reached out, taking my shaking hand in his large, warm palm. "The moment my plane landed in Europe, I realized the crisis was a distraction. I took a private jet straight back. I met them at the safe house where they had taken Luke, flanked by the federal police and a team of forensic accountants. I presented my father with the evidence of his fraud, and I presented Julian with an international arrest warrant. I gave them a choice: sign a total, absolute, irrevocable waiver of all parental and familial claims to Luke and my estate, or spend the next 20 years in a federal penitentiary." Adrian offered a grim, triumphant smile. "They signed the papers in 5 minutes. They are currently on a plane back to Europe, completely disinherited and barred from ever entering this country again. They have no power. They can never touch us." I let out a long, shaky breath, a final wave of relief washing over my tired soul. Adrian suddenly paused. He reached into the pocket of his trousers and pulled out a small, elegant black velvet box. He snapped it open, revealing a breathtaking, heavy platinum band set with a flawless, brilliant diamond that caught the morning light. He looked into my eyes, his scent expanding into an incredibly sweet, rich, and deeply devoted wave of dark cedarwood. "I was planning to propose to you on the exact date the contract ended, Caleb. I wanted it to be a beautiful, perfect surprise to show you that the contract was nothing more than a piece of trash compared to what I feel for you. But after everything that happened, I can't wait another second. I don't want a contract between us. I want a lifetime." Adrian dropped to one knee beside the bed, holding the ring up toward me. "Caleb, you are the heart of this house. You saved my son, you saved me, and you turned this sterile mansion into a real home. Recessive, dominant, it doesn't matter. You are my true mate. Will you marry me, Caleb? Will you be my legal mate, my husband, and Luke's mother forever?" The tears started falling all over again, thick and fast, blurring my vision. My chest heaved as a lifetime of pain, rejection, and insecurity finally broke apart inside me. When I was a child, I choked out between heavy, ragged sobs, my hands flying to cover my mouth. I was an orphan. I spent every single night praying to God to give me a family. the kind of family I never had. But when the doctors told me I was a recessive Omega, when Jacob's family called me names, and when Jacob called me broken, I believed them. I tried so hard to build walls. I tried so hard to convince myself that I didn't need a child, that I didn't need a mate, so I wouldn't get hurt anymore. I reached out, my trembling fingers catching the lapels of his shirt, pulling him up toward me. But standing in this room, looking at Luke, looking at you, I've realized that I can no longer live without this family. I don't care about the past anymore. This is the family I've dreamt of since I was a little boy sitting in an orphanage. Yes, Adrian. Yes, a million times yes. I will marry you. Adrian let out a ragged breath, a brilliant, breathtaking smile breaking across his handsome face. He slid the heavy platinum ring onto my finger, a perfect, flawless fit, before throwing his arms around my waist and pulling me into a fierce, passionate, an incredibly deep kiss that sealed our souls together forever. Right between us on the bed, a tiny, sleepy voice suddenly mumbled, "MMH, Mommy? Daddy?" That evening, the house felt completely different. The air was thick with the beautiful, harmonious scent of a completely bonded family. The rich, commanding cedarwood, the sweet, delicate chamomile, and the fresh, joyful rain sent all perfectly woven together into a seamless blanket of pure happiness. Adrian had spent the last hour trying to hint at some other plans he had for us in the master bedroom. His dark eyes glittering with a very specific, spicy alpha hunger that made my face burn with an intense, delicious heat. But our plans were once again violently dismantled by a 3-year-old security guard. The moment Adrian tried to lift Luke to carry him to his own bedroom for the night, Luke let out a sharp, terrified whine in his sleep. His tiny brow furrowed into a deep scowl, a heavy, fat tear escaping his closed eyelashes as he clutched my sweater with a death grip. "No, don't leave," Luke whimpered sleepily, his little voice cracking with a lingering, subconscious echo of the past week's trauma. "Don't leave, Mommy. Luke, be a good boy. Don't leave." The spicy, romantic tension in the room melted instantly into a profound, overwhelming wave of parental tenderness. Adrian let out a soft, defeated sigh, a beautiful, incredibly warm smile curving his lips. He looked at me, shaking his head. "It looks like my corporate powers mean absolutely nothing against him. He's the real boss of this house?" I giggled softly, wiping away the tear from Luke's chubby cheek. Adrian climbed into the massive master bed beside me, pulling the heavy, soft duvet over all three of us. I lay on the left, Adrian lay on the right, and Luke was tucked perfectly, securely right in the middle, our little anchor. In the quiet darkness of the room, Luke's breathing quickly leveled out into a deep, peaceful rhythm. His tiny left hand was wrapped firmly around my index finger, while his tiny right hand was clamped around Adrian's thumb. He was completely safe, anchored to both sides of his world. I turned my head on the pillow, meeting Adrian's intense, dark gaze. He reached across Luke's sleeping body, his large hand gently catching the back of my neck, pulling my face forward just enough for our lips to meet in a slow, lingering, and incredibly sweet kiss that tasted of pure promises and a lifetime of devotion. "Good night, my beautiful Omega," Adrian whispered against my lips, his scent wrapping around me like a warm embrace. "Good night, my Alpha," I murmured back, closing my eyes, as I drifted off to sleep, listening to the soft, rhythmic breathing of my son beside me. The last remnants of my old, broken past vanished into the dark. I wasn't broken. I wasn't a dead end. I was Caleb, a proud Omega, a beloved mate, and a mother to the most wonderful little boy in the world. And we were finally truly home.